Welcome to another episode of The Local Dive. This is Alex Scott, joined by Dean and Sarah, Ashlyn Portero, and
Hello.
newly engaged Jacob Baldry.
Newly engaged. His biceps are claimed.
They are claimed, locked down. So welcome back. We are excited to jump into another episode, and today we will be discussing all things SBC annual meeting. We just got back from Nashville a few days ago after a very important and a couple of business-filled days. We have a new member of the executive committee now on the podcast.
Hey,
Dean.
let's go.
Congratulations on your appointment to the EC. But, I think it's one of those things that we actually thought would be very helpful for us to discuss and to kind of keep in front of our church as we are an SBC church. And so talk about the meeting, what happened, why it matters, and where things go from Nashville. So we're going to dive into that in just a second on the kind of important business side of things. But before we do, in the shallow end, it'll be sort of themed that way. What were your highlights of the convention that don't relate specifically to business and resolutions and motions and, all the things that happened on Tuesday and Wednesday?
Well, I think it was just fun to see people that I hadn't seen in, some people over 2 years. And so that was really exciting just to reconnect with friends and catch up, in a post-COVID world with people. So that, I would say, just the relationship side was definitely the highlight for me. The exhibit hall is usually fun, but I didn't really make it in there very much this year. So I was kind of bummed about that. But yeah, I think just getting to see people and catch up. What about you guys?
Well, the SBC toss.
It was awesome.
With John Powell Memorial. John Powell is John was killed by a semi-truck trying to rescue someone on the side of the road from their car that was burning, rescue a stranger, and actually pushed his friend out of the way to save his friend's life. Mm-hmm. John was the original with Cody Gibson and myself, brought gloves and baseball to the SBC and would just throw around whenever we in the exhibit hall. And then we got kicked out, and then we started moving to fields, and it got bigger and bigger. We've been on 2 Division I baseball fields, Samford and Dallas Baptist. And so this year we decided, since it's been a year since John's passing, to name the toss after him. And we made it a big deal, and a lot of people showed up.
There were a ton of people out there.
I don't know the numbers were, but also John's parents came, and John's widow, Catherine, came, and she threw out the first pitch to John's dad, who used John's glove. It was just amazing, man. It was just like, if you can be joyful and extremely sad at the same time, that was like the example of that. Like it was to see see Mr. Powell's face. I mean, he was obviously like grieving his son, but it was just so neat to see him have a moment of just like joy. And he sent me a really nice text afterwards, and that was just really cool for me. That was definitely another one for me was so I saw Mark Richt in the lobby of the hotel, and Rick said, "Hey Dean," he knew my name, which I could not believe that. Then he introduced me to the person next to him as, "This is the guy who dented my car." Because
at least you're known for something.
Yeah. So I opened the door in a parking lot and hit a car really hard and did not. And then the person got out, and it was Mark Richt, like 2 months ago. And oops, that's how he knows me now. Remember my name? And this is the guy who dented my car.
Hey,
that was pretty cool.
Yeah, you made a. What's the
You're making dents among celebrities.
You made an impression, quite literally.
An impression.
But yeah, I was gonna say, this I guess sort of is business, but it's always a highlight of the convention, the IMB sending ceremony.
Oh yeah,
where we had a chance to commission 60+ missionaries to go all over the world. Some whose faces could not be shown for security reasons, as they go to places where the gospel is not welcomed, but they go anyways, and so. That is always a huge highlight of the convention. And then I participated in the first annual SBC cigar smoke.
That's right, you did.
So I don't know if I'm allowed to say that. Like, it sort of feels like, not something that would normally happen. But that was quite interesting and enjoyable. So those were 2 things that were highlights for me. So. Anything that on the the shallow side of things that you did not enjoy about?
I thought you were going to say something else.
So did I. I was like, whoa, how do you really feel, Alex?
I thought it was going to be something that
that
rhymes with hit list.
Yeah, same here.
But starts with an
every
SH.
listener, But he did not say that. But everyone listening thought that was coming.
I wasn't even thinking about that. So
it's like, wow.
It's like Alex is
No,
coming.
I wasn't.
Smokes one cigar and he's just edgy.
I was not coming out to be edgy or controversial. And I've smoked more than one cigar, so I need that to be known. That was not my first cigar.
I didn't mean it that way.
Mine was the ridiculousness of the CBN crowd. Like that they said they were going to take the ship, and like we walked in, and people had some stickers on that said like "Stop CRT" and "Stop Biden Baptists," and it was just like it was
blocking Biden Baptists. I think
it's like, do you think this is a game? I mean, that's just kind of how it felt. So that annoyed me a decent amount. It was pretty hot in the convention hall,
which like first time ever.
Yeah,
I feel like it's usually free.
It was just so many of us, and it was that was a lot. And the bad, I mean, I anticipate a lot more bad. Now there's some definitely always like random things, Oh, the box lunches, the fact that every like banquet that you have there has to have a box lunch.
Yeah.
When you're in this amazing food city, and the box lunches cost more than. They cost so much money, to get one of those. It's like a monopoly or whatever, but they make you can't bring food in.
Yeah.
So that's just like the worst. Let me talk about first world problems. Like seriously, I am in Nashville, and it's like great food cities in the South, and I'm eating a boxed lunch, at the Midwestern luncheon or whatever. When Midwestern's the kind of place that would have awesome food if you let them, and here I am eating a turkey roll up and Lay's chips and a bottle of water.
Oh. So, due to Nam's refrigerator truck going out, it was a boxed lunch.
I forgot about that.
Hot dogs.
That people were sweating that one.
Yeah, they did the best they could with
there was
circumstances presented to them.
I think there was 10,000 at the Nam lunch that were signed up for it, and just for your listeners to know the context, like the refrigerator truck bringing the box lunches broke down. So only like half the people got fed.
all the meat spoiled or something. And so,
Dean, I want to know if you took the NAM gift this year, because the bag was great, but inside there was a hammock and like a travel neck pillow. So I want to know if you're gonna put your hammock to use.
I never saw that.
Oh,
I never got my hands on the bag. No, I didn't even know about this. A hammock. Wow.
Well, if you want to borrow mine, you can.
Oh, thank you. Much appreciation for the time I love to sleep outside with mosquitoes.
I was gonna say, do you have someplace inside you can hang it up?
Yeah,
I'm in.
Ashlyn, any things that annoyed you?
I did have something
from a petty perspective.
So the NAM lunch is always, a good event at the SBC. And this year they had Matthew West as a musical guest. And I have nothing against Matthew West. Like, he's fine. But he sang, Kevin Ezell had him sing this song, that if you were there, you know what I'm referencing. But it was I will, assuming the best, it was meant to be like just I think a funny joke about relationships between dads and daughters. And, I mean, growing up, I remember my dad saying stuff about, the way you're dressed or whatever. Like, so I think it was meant to play off of like, we know the joke about, dads wanting their daughters to dress more conservatively. And, I think it escalates all the way up to when you see dads, holding guns in prom pictures and stuff like that. Just kind of like that culture. Which on the extreme end, you could go into discussions about, that's a toxic way to view women and all that kind of stuff. And then on the other end, I'm sure there were people who were like, oh, that was just funny. And it just plays on, different dynamics of a dad-daughter relationship. But the whole song was called Modest as Hottest. And I just found the whole thing incredibly uncomfortable, mostly. And, everybody's different. So I'm assuming that this was cleared beforehand, but mostly that he was like singing it kind of directed toward, and I say directed toward because the video was on them, Kevin Ezell's daughters. And so that, I just thought that was uncomfortable. I'm not speaking for them. I have no idea how they felt about it. And, everybody can choose to do different things. And so if that was just a lighthearted joke, that's totally, totally fine for them. But I think for everybody, for the thousands of people sitting in the room, like there were just people around me who also were saying it just felt cringy. Like one of the lines was, I need a little more Amish, a little less Kardashian. And so just the whole thing, to me, no matter where you land on that spectrum of if you truly were angered by it versus just uncomfortable versus, oh, I just thought it was funny, can't we joke about things? Wherever you are on that spectrum, to me, the biggest thing is that it just felt unnecessary. And so that I didn't love that. I do love the NAM lunch, and it's always great to hear the ways that we support church planting and pastors. Like, that is so fun. And so it was more like, I wish we hadn't gone there, because I just think there are many other better things that could have, been done. And
your NAM crowd would not buy into that as much, So I think sometimes it's a read the room thing and realize that the SBC's changed a lot.
Yeah.
Because at first it's like kind of a red meat song.
Yeah.
So it's like at the convention, that's usually the red meat crowd that's there. They'll just think that song is the greatest thing in the world.
Right.
They would just think it was the most amazing thing ever. And so maybe it was a bad room read. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, to me, I think it just felt totally unnecessary in general. Like, I don't. It was as a woman, it was uncomfortable to me because I do think that it put, we can rehash the conversation about, women dressing versus men looking, and that, and how we all present ourselves and all of that stuff. There's no need to like dig all that stuff up. I felt like it was uncomfortable. But also just for the sake of the event, in my opinion, again, I'm not the person running the event. It just felt really unnecessary.
I was like, given all that was discussed even at the convention about the sex abuse scandals within SBC churches, that was where I was like, probably
not great timing.
Not ideal. Yeah. My pet peeve is far less significant, but people not knowing when or how to use the microphones, or like, so go to somebody, JD would be like, microphone 2A, do you wish to speak against the motion? No, but da-da-da-da. And it's like,
no, but here's my personal point I want to say.
Yeah, exactly. Or like, they go to a microphone, the person wouldn't be there, or like they would just speak out of order. I was like, people, for the love of everything, just learn how to participate in the business meeting. That was maybe my biggest pet peeve. Any superlatives or anything like for people who, obviously, Dean, you did the lottery, so you handed out a ton of superlatives, but like just maybe reflections of people who had good moments at the convention.
Well, JD led family. From the stage, that's not easy. That many people, he served us well. Yeah, in terms of that role, he actually does a good job too of adding some humor to it, of just trying to keep it. It's a Robert's Rules of Order large business meeting. It's
15,000 people.
Yeah. And so I stayed in the convention hall more than I ever do because there were so many, we didn't want to miss anything. There were so many important things. I thought I appreciated Josh Wester, one of our very good friends, who just really had a good pulse on things, how things worked, and was able to help us like understand like what needed to happen when, and just how it worked. You had to have somebody that really knows how it works, like how to get things done and speak to things and that type of thing. So I want to give a shout out to Josh for that. Also, I thought his speech on the we'll talk about it in a minute, but on the abortion resolution was really strong. I really appreciate him for that. Just see his heart and his compassion there, and also his knowingness, if that's a word. Like what knowledge, knowing, like that's that. Like he really knew the topic well about what we were talking about, and he's the real deal and one of the bright lights in our network of churches. He works for the RLC. So I want to give him just like a kind of a MVP-ish kind of shout out for his behind the scenes. I know he was on the microphone for the one moment, but behind the scenes he did so much, which is really great. And also another superlative I think needs to go to Willie Rice for his convention sermon, which is absolutely fantastic. Willie's a great friend, trust him a lot, and just his plea, to really hone in on what matters, and to do it the right way. And Willie lives with integrity. And what he spoke was really who he is and what he's about.
Pastor of Calvary in Clearwater.
Yeah.
And any superlatives, Ashlyn?
Oh gosh.
I'll give one to David Bumgarner, who there are some great clips of.
He's a seminary student.
Yeah,
right?
I think he's a seminary student and then maybe like a minister at a church somewhere. But he made a motion for them to lower the AC that got quite a bit of applause, and he became the chair of the AC committee. And then later asked at the end of Dr. Aiken's presidential address on this, or seminary report, asked for him to unblock him on Twitter because he believed he was incorrectly blocked when he was trying to come to his defense. And so Dr. Aiken, as he would, handled that very well and said, son, I'm sure it was an honest mistake. I'll have you unblocked by the end of the day.
Yeah, so. I feel like if you're going to use the floor to like assert your personal, grievances. Like, that's the way to do it. You have to just own it.
He owned all that.
Oh, he
owned it for for more than just him.
And I was saying, and had fun doing it, and brought some good levity to the room in moments where I felt like it was kind of needed. So
because on the surface you want to punch somebody who does all that, but it was kind of like, thanks.
He did it.
We need this stuff.
He did a good job. So.
I want to give maybe like an MVP or just like most awesome person to Amy Whitfield.
Oh, definitely.
Yes.
I think if you are, maybe more in like inner circles of the SBC, meaning that like you attend regularly and you follow convention business and things like that, you know who Amy is. But she also, I think in many ways flies under the radar for a lot of people. But, I knew that she was very involved and of course she, works for the convention. But just to get to see more up close of what she does and obviously just who she is, like she's just a fantastic person. But yeah, just to see how like trusted she is by so many people and really is a backbone, I think, of the SBC.
No, that's the right way to put it. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. She just really is a phenomenal leader. And so it was just cool to see what I know to be true and what have seen from many others, but to really see her in action. She's just a very admirable leader. So definitely a shout out to her.
Cool. Well, those are all great superlatives, and we'll move on into the deep dive. I guess it will be continuing the same topic, but this was, Dean, as you mentioned, a convention where it's always important to be in the hall. It's the people who show up and who vote and who make decisions. It's the people in the room, and so for some conventions that we've attended in the past, like there have been pivotal moments to be in the hall and other times where you didn't have to be quite so much. And this was one of those conventions where there was a lot of business a lot of the time, and that was important and necessary. And so I think maybe the first thing to talk about could be that could be helpful as we think through some of the major highlights is the presidential election. And a couple episodes back, we did a preview episode of the SBC, but maybe if we could talk about what happened in the election, who was running, and what the outcome was, and why it matters to start. So Ed Litton was elected president eventually. But Dean, can you maybe talk about just what happened, what transpired, and why it matters?
Yeah. First of all, why everything we're talking about matters is we're talking about the largest Protestant denomination in the world. Like pretty much a almost like bell ringer of evangelicalism in America. Not the only ones. There's a lot of great denominations in America, but like we are by far the largest. And also the missionaries we have around the world and the church planners and the institutions we have that have taken, decades and decades and decades to build, are all like at stake when it comes to these important meetings. So Ed Litton won president. Ed was viewed. There's kind of three main candidates. A guy named Randy Adams won too, but no one really took seriously that he was going to compete at all. Mike Stone was what's known as the CBN candidate, the Conservative Baptist Network, which is a fundamentalist group that is trying to really kind of overtake the convention and the direction of the convention. That's accusing the SBC of going liberal and of embracing all these different Marxism and being just liberal in general. Like they would and woke and all those kind of words.
Politically liberal, theologically
liberal, all those things. And then you have Al Mohler who ran, who's kind of your classic SBC statesman, but very institutional. And a lot of people do not believe that a president of an entity, which he is, should be the convention president because that person indirectly appoints their own trustees. Because you're basically appointing someone who's going to appoint people to do that. And there's a conflict of interest there. So a lot of people just don't feel comfortable with that and want a pastor to be president of the SBC, which that's very rational. And I love Al Mohler, but I think it's very rational. And then Ed Litton, really, I think is sort of is almost becoming like from a male, like the male version of a voice of our generation, of like my generation, y'all's generation, kind of the older statesman voice of it. The female voice, she's not older, but it might be Amy. It really could be Amy. You're talking about being so respected, and that type of thing. Kathy too, Ed's wife. They both really are kind of together like a voice of a people that are strongly, unapologetically evangelical. Committed to all the conservative principles of Scripture as defined by the Scriptures, and are committed to the SBC and the work being done through the churches. But's even the wrong word. It's and also want to go about it in a way that's compassionate and the right way, and are gonna not create controversies in order to have more power, and they're going to represent people the right way. And it's David Dockery said that to help you understand fundamentalism versus evangelicalism, this is really what was happening at the SBC. It can be boiled down. David French wrote an article about it too, about fundamentalism versus evangelicalism. David Dockery said that to help understand it, an evangelical is someone who likes Billy Graham. A liberal is someone who thinks that Billy Graham is a fundamentalist. And a fundamentalist is someone who thinks Billy Graham is liberal, which I think is a great breakdown.
Yes, very helpful.
So I would say our church leadership lands strongly evangelical, and so we were really trying to withstand the takeover of a fundamentalist group that we thought would have led the convention in a very bad direction, a very negative direction, a lot of tactics too, just a lot of foul play going on in terms of how things are happening. And thankfully, by the Lord's grace, Ed Litton won. And at least for the next year minimum, we have held them off and can allow our convention to go forward as a big tent, convention, which means that we cooperate under the banner of the Baptist Faith and Message. Which means for our churches to cooperate together, we don't need all these fences up. We need a tent. The fence is the Baptist Faith and Message. So that's enough for us. So we think that we can differ on a few things that aren't Baptist Faith and Message level issues and still be churches that might not agree with each other, might not even go to each other's churches, but in terms of, might not be invited to speak at each other's churches, but can cooperate for the nations. And that really, I think, is what one of the big wins coming out was that we are still going to be a big tent, not an ironclad wall, a big tent convention, which I want to be a part of.
So I'm glad you said that, because I think looking at the presidential election, to me, it emphasized how much I think Southern Baptists largely have not fully grasped and embraced the big tent mindset. Maybe in theory, but I don't really see that happening as much functionally for a couple of reasons. One, I think the fact that, so we had 4 people run for president, and everyone pretty much knew it was going to come down to a runoff, because it's very difficult to get an overwhelming majority, out of 4 candidates, especially those 4. It just probably wasn't going to happen. But the fact that it did come down to a runoff between Ed Litton and Mike Stone, who are, 2 very different candidates from, largely supported by very different groups within the SBC. And so that was very interesting to me. I expected for more people. I could see Dr. Moeller being someone who could kind of pull from, I hate to say those 2 tribes, but from, kind of the opposite ends of the spectrum. I could see more people coming together under his leadership, finding a common ground. But the fact that it was those 2 says something to me. And then also listening to the nominating speeches and just the which were all done very well. But then also just kind of the chatter and the analysis leading up to it, the number of times that I heard, words like complementarian, CRT, ideologies, many other words that, are by and large, should be taken care of under the banner of the Baptist Faith and Message. I feel like I heard more this year about these kind of specific, maybe not polarizing topics, but maybe as opposed to, we all want to come together around a unifying mission of, planting churches, sending missionaries, doing disaster relief, kind of these big tent things that we say it's worth cooperating for. And yet there were so much mention of things that I'm like, really? Is this what we want our presidents to spend a lot of their time advocating, or discussing these things? Now, they're also important points to make, because they also, I think a lot of those words have become buzzwords that indicate whether someone is more, liberal or conservative, which is okay, all of us in the SBC, if you're a Southern Baptist, you're conservative. Let's just say.
Yeah, the conservative Baptists are called the SBC.
Right, exactly. But so that was just interesting to me that, and it makes sense. It's much harder to actually be a big tent denomination it's much harder to be a big tent denomination than to say we're a big tent denomination. And we are. I fully believe that we are. But I do think, even though I'm personally very happy with the outcomes of this SBC, from who was elected president to, the motions and the things that were passed, and we'll get there. I also think it was revealing that we have a long way to go in terms of truly cooperating in a big tent fashion. And of course, with 47,000 churches, or I think however many there are, ballpark that, there's going to be discord, and like Dean said, we may not even want to go to one another's churches in that large of a group. There may be that big of a difference. So I don't know. I was encouraged by the outcome. It's certainly in the context of this discussion of the presidential election, and I do believe, I hope that Ed Litton will be a unifying voice, and someone who just his demeanor, he comes across, I don't know him personally, but he comes across very, charitable, very gracious, truly the vision I think that he's cast for the convention to be the best that it can be, and to be unified around the right things. I'm very encouraged by that. But I do think that we got a glimpse at how difficult it actually is, as human beings to really cooperate under that large of a tent. And so that will be interesting in the years to come.
Yeah, and the CBN has no interest in cooperating under a big tent, which is going to make things very complicated going forward. And it's hard, too, because they're doing it in the name of, like, we're standing for the Bible,
right,
type of thing, which is just dishonest. It's like to say that, to pretend that Ed Litton and J.D. Greer and these people who are just, who love the word. And
really Al Mohler they put into that camp.
Yeah, it's unbelievable just how Danny Aiken, President of Southeastern Seminary, just how dishonest that is.
And I sorry, just to interject, I think that's what I was trying to get at when I was saying, like, it's just, I get why it's being done, but it's weird to me when it's like we're going to drill down on something like complementarianism or on one ideology, out of the many that are out there, things like that, when, like I said, especially on the, complementarian thing, like, that's covered in the Baptist faith and message. Like, if we're all here in this room in the SBC, we have spoken to that by affirming
we've dealt with
our statement of faith that unifies all of our churches. And so that to me is just always very off-putting when those types of things, those secondary, maybe even tertiary issues become the driving force of why someone should be in leadership.
Well, yeah. And so one thing that they went after Ed hard on was that he and Kathy, his wife, did a sermon series together that was multiple weeks. And again, Kathy was not preaching. She was not he did not hand the pulpit and say, fill in for me for a month. They did a series together, which to me, in my mind, I thought, okay, well, Ed probably thought, wow, Kathy would have some great insights on this. Let's just be kind of neat for us together to talk through these scriptures and that type of thing. Well, you can disagree with that.
Totally.
Yeah, like that's like you can totally think that's not, or you can say, I wouldn't do that, or that's not best. But to turn that into like a referendum on Ed Litton, I had a couple pastors get in touch with me on Sunday afternoon after we're all back in our churches after being gone at the SBC, and had said they had church members come up to them. This didn't happen to me here at City Church, but I had church members come up and say, "Is it true the SBC is going liberal, going woke, that it's drifting? Like, what happened? What are we going to do? How does this happen?" It's like, well, no. We haven't even a centimeter drifted, in any direction apart from the Bible. And if anyone is about the sufficiency of Scripture, I would say it's our tribe, because we're saying, we're not perfect, we're not claiming that, but we're saying we're not going to add or take away from the Bible. Because what does fundamentalism do? It adds to the Scriptures, but they're doing it under the banner of sufficiency, and it's just dishonest. Or maybe it's just a complete lack of self-awareness. It's somewhere in the camp of that. But we have to make sure that we're very clear to people that want to know that the SBC is as in step with the Baptist Faith and Message 2000 as it has ever been. And that's the big tent that is very complicated, as Ashton rightly pointed out, to cooperate under. That's what we're working towards. We're bearing with one another for the sake of the nations. And again, and it's not just about first tier issues. Like, if you're a denomination, you extend beyond that. Like, so the Baptist Faith and Message covers our second tier issues. We need to unite in those two to be able to function together. But it's a big tent where those things are allowed to happen. So it was really important that Ed won. And that and at least for the next little while, that we're going to have because Ed's going to point why this matters to those listening. He's going to appoint trustees. Some of the reasons why we have some of the folks in the executive committee right now that are causing such problems is because they were appointed by former president of the SBC. That JD would have never appointed those people. And so, and Ed's not going to either. So we're going to get people on there that want to be big tent folks and that are really gospel above all people.
One of the things, too, that I think is interesting on this point of it being a big tent and the Baptist Faith and Message speaking to certain things at various levels in terms of kind of primary and secondary and tertiary issues, is the CBN has rallied around specific secondary and tertiary issues, while at the same time discounting things that 5 or 6 years ago, there two groups of people would have never been able to come together on in terms of soteriology and, kind of God's plan for salvation. Like, you have the CBN, who somehow united Calvinists and, kind of more classical Arminian, theological camps, where 5 or 6 years ago that would not have been the case, but because they're picking complementarianism or some other secondary issue, these two tribes can now coincide, and Calvinism is no longer the boogie monster, and it's liberalism and wokeism. And I think it just shows that it's not about having a big tent denomination, but it's about who can we have in power and who can we have in place to try to drive our mission forward. It's just interesting,
and a love of fighting.
Yeah,
really. I mean, like the same people who used to wake up in the morning and yell about Calvinism 24/7, now all of a sudden are cozied up with them out of nowhere for a new cause. It's like, look, it's about loving to fight.
Well, and I would say if, for any of us, not just the CBN people, but for any of us, if you're going to take up second tier issues, you need to do it in a way that suggests that you believe everything about the first tier issues and that those things come to bear on the second and third tier issues.
Yeah. Preach. That's really good. No, that's noted. Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, I appreciate that thought. That's really important. And so, just to those listening, the SBC, in terms of what we believe theologically, has not changed. And a lot of this really does go back to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And maybe not him personally, but everything that is Donald Trump. It was post 2016 that all this came about.
Well, I mean, even going down where you're talking about the buttons and the political residue was so evident there.
Oh yeah, and so I was talking to an SBC, real big CBN guy, one of their main people, who I'm trying to have a relationship with, just to try to build a bridge. And I said, look, man, how are you more conservative than me when it comes to these things? I'm talking about theologically, inerrancy of Scripture. Are you kidding me? Complementarianism, I'm a complementarian. I might not carry it as far as you do, but because I want to be biblical about it. Not, I think there's a fine line between complementarianism and misogyny. And what's the line? The Bible. Okay, that's the line. If the Bible is interpreting your views on men and women, then that's complementarianism. If it's culture and right wing ideology, that's misogyny, and we need to talk about that. But in general, out loud. So I said, so the only difference between you and me, really, I said, I'm not pro CRT. I'm pro racial reconciliation and addressing racial injustice. I'm anti-racism, but I'm not pro CRT. I don't side with intersectionality and things like that. I said, so please explain to me. So the only difference between the two of us is you think Mike Pence should have spoke at the SBC and I don't. And he laughed and said, well, I guess maybe. I said, so don't tell me this is about politics. Yeah. This is about politics. And so it was about three things. It was about the CBN, in my opinion, is about Donald Trump very, very much disliking Russell Moore, who's no longer the president of the RLC, and getting revenge for Paige Patterson, who was their hero, who was removed from President of Southwestern Seminary, who was fired. And I think it really goes back.
And has been driving behind the scenes.
It goes back to those three things, and so we needed to fight that, right?
Yeah. Well, that was, I think, hopefully helpful conversation. I think brought some good insight to the election, and there were other, there's second vice president, first vice president who are elected as well. Those had, I would say, mixed results in our eyes, but certainly less significant in terms of the role that they play than the president. So we won't dive into those. But two things that I think would be helpful to cover is one of the committees is the Committee on Resolutions, and they, church members and messengers are able to submit resolutions to this committee for consideration to be brought before the convention as a whole. There were 10 resolutions, I think, brought by the committee, if I remember correctly, that covered anything from racism to pastoral qualifications to the Uyghur genocide in China, and their statements that assembled group of messengers in those 2 days makes in that moment that are sort of position statements to help maybe guide conversation.
Yeah, and I had an ERLC staff member tell me they're actually very helpful resolutions, so they actually take them to senators and to congressmen and they say, hey, here's what your constituents say.
Yeah.
Here's where they stand on this issue. So I was going like, oh, they're really necessary, and then that was helpful to go, oh, okay. And then also just clarity as a denomination on where we stand together on certain issues that matter.
Yeah. So the committee also chooses not to bring resolutions forward, as there are some that they don't feel are appropriate, or maybe they're poorly worded, poorly written, not
we've
clear.
Covered it before.
Yeah, it's been spoken to before, but there's one resolution that was brought forward from the floor that was not brought forward by the committee, and it was brought by, so I think he's CBN pastor, and it was on abortion, and it was taking a stance on essentially anything other than the abolition of abortion is stopping short and basically sin. And there was a strong and concerted effort to actually not pass that resolution, which on face value sounds kind of contradictory to what the Southern Baptist position would be. So can we kind of maybe talk about that resolution and speak to why there was heavy debate against a resolution that at face value seems to be about the abolition of abortion?
Yeah, well, I think it's very easy to look at that from the outside and say, well, wait, I thought, in the SBC we take a strong pro-life stance, right? Like the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, hosts Evangelicals for Life every year in conjunction with the March for Life, and they are constantly, advocating for pro-life legislation and just upholding, that view and that cause. Of course, churches are too, locally in pregnancy centers and our, congregations and things like that. But the big thing is that resolution, as many people said, is taking more of a punitive approach to the abolition of abortion. And so really what it was saying is that if we're not going to, if anything aside from complete and total abolition is unacceptable and in fact wrong or sinful, as you're saying, if Southern Baptists are going to take a hard stance there, then any stepping stones, we have very liberal abortion legislation in America right now. And so any stepping stones towards stricter, laws and eventually towards the abolition of abortion, we wouldn't be able to celebrate those things. And in fact, we would say that, that's not our cause. That's not what we're going for. Not just like it's not good enough. Of course, every person would think, you can look at other countries across the world that you would think of as way more quote unquote liberal as America. And they have, stricter laws about abortion. And so it really puts Southern Baptists in a bad place, and also I think would cast us in a light that, really I don't think would be welcoming or compassionate. I think that would override any attempts to be loving and to be compassionate and to do the work that we often do through pregnancy centers, through local churches, through ministries like, Psalm 139 and many other ways that we try to come alongside women who are facing the crisis of unplanned pregnancy. And so it wouldn't be winsome. And I think that's kind of the gist of, I think the different positions that we're swirling together.
It doesn't allow for wins. And that's really problematic. Is it's nuclear option or nothing? My friend Jonathan Merritt, who's not Southern Baptist, who's extremely liberal, he was there covering it for Just News, and he and I were just catching up really quick in the lobby, and he just shook his head at it, and he's saying, Jonathan's actually pro-life, and it's the one thing left I think that he's conservative on. But he goes, like, anyone in the world needs to wonder where Southern Baptists stand on abortion. He's like, has anyone even had the slightest
right?
Question?
There's 15,000 people in the room, and everyone knows where they're at on life.
Yeah, so of course we want Roe v. Wade overturned. Of course we want abortion abolished. But in the meantime, let's do the great work of life, of pregnancy centers and adoption and foster care and heartbeat bills and parental notifications, all the things to talk
Placing
about.
ultrasound machines.
Yeah, it was just troubling. So of course what's going to happen is the CBN crowd is going to try to spin it. I'm sure if they had video cameras in there, they're going to show everybody raise their ballots up, voted with against that motion, and they're going to say, see, we're talking about the SBC has become pro-choice and that kind of stuff. Well, that's just a outright lie. It is a sinful lie to say that.
Well, and I think even to your point, Dean, about the idea that many times these resolutions go to congressmen and women to say this is where your constituents stand. Now, if somebody takes that resolution, it's essentially saying, hey, anything that you've done or you you bring before, any kind of legislative body that isn't the abolition is sin, and that's just not helpful. It's not. I mean, I was talking with one of our elders who was there, and he said that he's an attorney. He said the way to win this is incremental approach, and to take it step by step, and to win hearts and minds through things like ultrasounds, through things like heartbeat bills, through other kind of legislative efforts, step by step. And he's like, this just squashes that. It makes it impossible to do that. And so I think it's a unfortunately, it did pass. The resolution did, but
and it didn't at first. And
right.
It came back, which shows we are a grassroots organization.
Yes,
we're not a top-down system. You know,
people have the ability to bring things to the floor.
And increments, y'all mentioned, like, isn't that ministry? Right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, isn't that like it's a day by day? It's a process. It's it's steps along with people. Yeah. I would encourage people to go to listen to Dana McCain's speech. Search that on social media or online. Dana McCain's speech. She's a reporter in Dothan, Alabama, and she was on the resolutions committee, and it's fantastic.
Yeah. That's really good.
Were there any other resolutions that y'all thought were that were passed that you thought were helpful, or just the work of the resolutions committee that you think is worth discussing before we move on?
I think our strong statement against racism, resolution 2 was very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing is to look at, for how much criticism there was of Resolution 9 from 2 years ago, it really, a lot of Resolution 2 drew upon Resolution 9. I mean, so to just see the, the need to kind of temper, on the one hand, temper the outrage that came from critics of Resolution 9 and maybe even Resolution 2 to say, look, we actually are united together against racism, by and large, but then also to say, but this is still so important to talk about. And so I think Resolution 2, hopefully did what it was intended to do. And I also think it's helpful to keep, I know a lot of people were upset that Resolution 2 didn't, outright name critical race theory, but that's really helpful because if we have to pass a resolution for every single secular ideology that comes up, one, I think it puts way too much weight on really what should be viewed as tools that can live in their place, but should be rejected as worldviews that can, if they compete with the Christian worldview. And it, I think it just keeps that conversation rolling, where if we have to pass a new resolution for every single ideology, where do you draw the line as new things continue to emerge? Of course, as America grows more and more secular, like that, this is going to continue to happen. And so I just appreciate the broad language of the resolution that is also unequivocal, in its stance against racism. It even draws upon, I think it had a quote from a 1995 resolution that was passed. And that's not to say, we dealt with that in 1995. No, these things are important. We do need to continue to talk about them, but we have to do that in a productive way that accounts for the fact that these conversations are going to continue. And so, I mean, just reading, I know that there are a lot of people of color, a lot of African-American pastors who, are really questioning, do I still belong in the SBC? Is there a place for me? And to see some of those men speak out and say, the fact that this resolution passed and the fact that these conversations have gone the way they have doesn't erase everything, doesn't mean that we don't stop speaking to, or that we don't speak to it anymore. We do. In fact, there's more work to do. That was the thing that kind of kept coming into my mind, is that, what we have now is a lot more work to do, but to know that some of those things were dealt with in the right way, including, I think, Resolution 2, at least continues to allow us to take small steps forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think Resolution 2 passing was huge for a lot of reasons, but one specifically is just to the churches that are represented in the SBC that are non-Anglo, and the ability to continue to make that statement that we are not going to stand for racism. 20% almost of the congregations in the SBC are a majority non-Anglo, and 60% of NAM's newest church plants are non-Anglo. And now
we have 6 or 7 state convention presidents who are black out of our 44.
Yeah.
And I also love seeing women lead at the SBC this year. I think Meredith Cook did a fantastic job with Committee on Nominations. See her in that role as the chair.
Committee on Committees.
Committee on Committees, thank you, sorry. And Committee on Committees. And then Leah Finn is going to become the nominations chair. Is that right, Ashlyn? Is it nominations chair that Leah Finn's going to be overseeing? Yes, okay. So, so I just love seeing some of those things happening, like where we're headed.
And our own Ashlyn Portero serving as a parliamentarian.
Yeah,
speaking
and
on the
spoke
microphone.
on the microphone. What was it like? I mean, it's kind of a vague question. What was it like looking out that many people and seeing, like when the ballots went up, did you know instantly who won every time? I mean, because the way we do it, listeners, is they'll say all in favor, and you raise your ballot. All oppose, and there's so many ballots that go up across the. Can you tell right away what won and stuff from up there?
Yeah, I mean, it is a lot easier to see than if you're sitting out in the crowd. Like you guys were sitting there. There were definitely a few where it was kind of like, okay, we gotta like look at this for a second. But I mean, it's a ton of people. So, but it was neat on the things that needed to pass. On the resolutions that I personally really wanted to pass or to go a certain way. To see like overwhelming support for those things. It was neat to get to, have that vantage point. And it just allows you, I mean, for me, having sat in the room for 5 SBCs, annual meetings, to kind of get a behind the scenes look and really like the parliamentarians follow the Committee on Order of Business. And so you kind of like effectively become a part of that. And it's really interesting. Like it's neat to get to see the immense amount of work and thought and attention that goes into the polity and the running of our convention. These issues are important, and the way that they get discussed and move forward is by a lot of work happening, behind the scenes to then bring it to the messengers for that sort of bottom up, leadership to happen. And so, I learned so much, and I have so much more respect for the way that, like, Dan Darling had a op-ed in USA Today. He's now the senior vice president for NRB, is right? Yeah. Is that, I don't know if I got his title exactly right, but
National Religious Broadcasters. They're having their convention right now as we record this, actually.
Nice. Yeah. But he said, the way that the SBC operates can be messy but beautiful, and I think that's a good way, to see it. That there is a lot of order and structure, but the whole process can be kind of a hot mess. It can be kind of messy because there's so many decisions, so many things to be deliberated, so much business to happen. And yet the business is why we're there. And so that was just, I was grateful to get to, just be there and learn and get, kind of a unique vantage point of that.
That's awesome. There's one more thing I want to make sure we discuss, and that kind of continues the theme that we've talked about of the ability for messengers to bring things from the floor as a kind of bottom up instead of top down denomination. And Dean, you mentioned this earlier, but Grant Gaines, who's a pastor in Murfreesboro, and Ronnie Parrott, who pastors in the Charlotte area, brought a motion forward to create a third party of the investigation into the executive committee on their handling or mishandling of sex abuse cases. And as a member of the executive, now newly elected member of the executive committee, can you talk to why that was significant, and just how that will hopefully lend trust and credibility, and actually give the convention and the churches answers and clarity on this issue?
Yeah, I'm walking into an executive committee that will be under investigations, which is which is interesting. Of course, just respect to my friends Grant and Ronnie for bringing that to the floor. What needed to be done. There's alleged that there's been mishandlings of sexual abuse cases, and understanding awareness by the executive committee of the Southern Baptist Convention. So here's the deal: if that's not true, let's find out. If it's true, let's find out. And we need completely a third-party investigation with no interference or manipulation in any way, shape, or form by the executive committee for the truth to come out. And then based on what the third-party professional investigation does, then we act accordingly. So I think it's sending a message that, look, we're not going to put our head in the sand about this. PR is not our most important thing. We are not going to try to be defensive first. Saving our rear ends is not the goal here. The goal here is to care for God's image bearers and to care about truth. And whatever it takes to make that happen is what I'm going to be kicking and screaming. If it gets to that point in the room about that, because it's a non-negotiable that this has to be handled at the highest level. And if you have nothing to hide, then why push back? So my hope is that the executive committee that I will be a part of coming in up in September, there'll be nothing but you go do what you need to do, and we're going to be do nothing but comply. Mm-hmm. And there's no other option, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, it's well said. And I think as a messenger, I was thankful that passed overwhelmingly, and that I had the opportunity to vote for that. Ashton, do you have any thoughts on that before?
Yeah, I mean, echoing everything you guys said, I'm grateful that that hopefully good changes will be coming to the executive committee. That there was, I think, messengers really made a statement that somebody put it this way, and I don't remember who it was, but that the EC doesn't need to function as like a super entity. It is an entity, but it doesn't sit organizationally on top of the other entities and the churches. It's actually there to serve churches and for churches, to trust the executive committee, really, to allocate resources and to function in the way that it does, with running the business of the SBC, so that churches can rely on the EC to be served and supported as churches do what we are supposed to do, united under this mission, together as others. And so I think, I was glad to see that sort of overwhelming support, even down to language. I think it was in a motion it might have been a resolution, because there was an amendment to strike language that said that the executive committee empowers churches. And I understand, we could wordsmith things to death. So I'm going to assume good intentions there, that the executive committee does desire to empower churches, but the way that it read, and I think just in the moment, striking any kind of language that ascribes too much power and authority to the executive committee is just good. And I think that was, made very clear that that's what the messengers want right now.
Yeah. The EC's job is to keep the train on the tracks.
Yeah.
We don't need to, it's one of those things where we want to be limited government, small government people as Southern Baptists when it comes to how to do the autonomy of our churches. And the EC is best when it's not seen nor heard, and behind the scenes is doing what it needs to do to keep the train on the tracks. And anything else is a grab for more influence than it needs. Like, vision does not need to come from the executive committee. That's the president of the SBC's job. That's entity heads' jobs in terms of the like a NAM and a seminary make their own vision for their seminary, and IMB for IMB. So I'm glad we struck that down.
Yeah, there were multiple motions and amendments and things that helped kind of keep that in check. So
I wanted to just say, I think that motion by Todd Bankert to have the ERLC hire a third-party investigation, to sort of be able to look at how churches, have handled abuse and how abuse has been handled in the convention. I think that operating alongside the challenges to the executive committee and that investigation, I think it's really important that motion passed, especially knowing, and that motion was referred to the ERLC, which is really good, because I think the ERLC has done so much already. They've really led out on the Caring Well initiatives, and just to advocate for sexual abuse survivors within our convention. And so just, to say that some of those periphery works that happened that maybe didn't get as much attention were still very pivotal in kind of moving us forward in general, and saying, we don't tolerate sexual abuse, and we want to be above reproach in every way.
Absolutely. As we close, this has been, I think, an illuminating discussion, but we've only scratched the surface on what happened at the meeting. Are there any resources that you would recommend, or articles that you would point people to if they want to dig in more on just what happened and people's kind of take on the meeting?
I think David French's recap, he's not Southern Baptist, so that's helpful to have an outside perspective. Yeah. That was really good. I just Googled David French, Southern Baptist Convention, annual meeting or something along those lines. I thought it was really good. I've not read the article that Ashley mentioned, but I trust Dan Darling, so I'll go check out Dan's op-ed in the USA Today. That sounds really good as well.
Yeah.
So those
Baptist Press covered quite a few.
Yeah, if you just want the meat and potatoes, just go scroll through Baptist Press, and there'll be articles there. Jonathan Howe and Amy on their SBC This Week podcast, they recapped it.
Yeah.
So it's just a good understanding in terms of they just have such a knowledge.
Yeah.
So and it's complicated, y'all. It takes work to work together. And if we don't want to be a solo church, we're just going out this on our own. We have to bear with one another and and do the right work to get this machine in the right place, and we're going to keep doing that.
We can't send 3,500 missionaries to the nations without the other cooperating churches, and so it's worth the work.
It's worth it.
Well, we hope this has been a helpful discussion and brought some clarity to what happened in Nashville, and we look forward to joining you for another episode of The Local Dive next week.
And producer Jacob is engaged. Here we go. Shout out to Pat Scott.
He liked it, so he put a ring on it. See ya.
Thanks for listening to The Local Dive, a podcast diving into deep and shallow musings about Christ, the church, and culture. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow The Local Dive on social media and continue the conversation with us on Instagram and Twitter @TheLocalDivePod.